Hey, Tannah, how's it going?
It's going great. How's it going with you, Holly?
Well, I'm pretty excited to start this with you, talk
Oh,
about the
I'm
Enneagram.
so excited. I'm so excited. Yeah. It feels like time coming.
Yes, I would say so. I think we started talking about the Enneagram together two, 2 years ago?
Yeah. 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Mhm.
So, yeah, coming to this place of being able to have a full discussion or whatever. So, we're going to call this thing the Enneagram Adventure. That was sort of born out of this place that when I discovered the Enneagram, I don't know, maybe 2017-ish or something like that. Just sort of the ride that it was for me from a self-awareness perspective, with the Enneagram and how much I got out of it. So that's a little bit about that. Tana, I'd be curious for you to share what it is about the Enneagram that resonated with you.
Yeah, I think that first of all, entering into a personal connection with you, Holly, that felt very authentic right away was one of the few times in my life where I've felt like I've had an interaction right away that was very comfortable, and we had a lot of the same philosophies around accountability and kind of
Sure.
like all of the personal goals and aspirations that felt like, wow, I finally found my match in terms of who's gonna be able to jive with this with me and who's gonna be able to debate and have good conversation, and so, I think it was, first of all, you that, like, kind of entered me into that, but the Enneagram, it's more of a awareness around my actual motivation. I never understood the behaviors around. I was kind of aware of, like, where I was trying to get with anybody, right? Like, how's my
Sure.
motivation? Where does that
Sure.
show up in the world to everybody else that I'm interacting with? Um, but it was a moment with you actually that made me feel like, "Oh my god, this makes sense why I'm constantly questioning and constantly curious about why it is I do what I do
Yeah.
from a behavior standpoint."
Yeah, it's
Because I
definitely like a key part of the Enneagram, right, is that motivation piece that a lot of other assessments sort of only look at behavior.
exactly, exactly. So when I first before I ever took the test, I was looking at each type, and I'm looking at the names first, right? Like the little titles that come with every
Yeah.
number. And of course you think like, "Oh, maybe I'm this, maybe I'm that, maybe I'm," and never did I actually really step back and think like, "Okay, I might be a 2," um, until I actually took some time with every single number. And that for me in and of itself was the credibility alone. But then when I really understood my number and where it was coming from, it made so much sense. And the behaviors that I was representing, while they might read different, right? Which is why it's hard to read anybody that you
Yeah.
think, oh, they might be a this, they might be a that.
Right.
Until you really know them, you don't really understand that motivation. So that's when I
Right.
felt like this click of feeling actually connected to myself. As
Yeah.
wild
Yeah.
as that is at the
It's
age of 34 with 2 kids and, like, all of the things.
uh, well, I think that's interesting. So just the way that it clicks, because I remember a similar feeling when I sort of read through. I had taken it, like I said, I first took it in 2017, and I kind of actually brushed it aside at that time and was like, "Meh, it's just another thing."
Yeah. Yeah.
And but then when I retook an assessment that had a little more credibility behind its results and whatever,
Okay.
and I got my results, which I'm a 1-to-1 or sexual type 5. When I got those, I was like, "Holy crap." I felt really seen and really, like,
Yeah.
recognized in a different way, and was able to just resonate. While there were things that are not super flattering, like with every type, I really was like, "Oh, yeah, I do that. Oh, yep, there, I do that thing, and man, is somebody
Yeah.
got a camera in my house?" Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you had this moment because I did, where after identifying myself as a social 2, and you were my, like, Enneagram encyclopedia for this time frame, where I would come in and be like, "Hey, this thing that I do, wow, didn't notice that before," for 1, but for 2, like, where is that coming from? And I think, like, shout out to Brandon and Evolved Athlete to kind of, like, give me that full circle development. But it has been a journey, like, if I think about day 1 of finding out I'm a social 2 and what does that mean for me 2 years later today, I feel so much more evolved, I feel so different, I feel so comfortable in my number, where I remember getting my number right out of the gates and being like, "What the hell?"
Yeah.
Like, "Where's my value?" Like, where's, like, you feel super flawed, and
Yes.
the experience that I've seen from others when they first get their number is they're triggered. Like, but it points at these insecurities and these like questions that you've had about
It's
yourself. So it's really natural, right? But I think about when I first got that, and we'll get into subtype and all that stuff in future episodes and how important
right.
that is. But even the title, like I mentioned before, of considerate helper, I was triggered by. And so I'm like, "No, that's not me. That's not me. I'm more than that. I'm so much more than that. I'm more complex than that. I'm more than what I try to
Right.
do for other people." But wow, how helpful to become comfortable in the things that I now identify about myself. And without having gone through like that whole Enneagram journey over the last 2 years for me, have near that comfort or confidence or understanding, and I personally think that that's what a lot of people seek, and whether they know it or not, whether they know that they're seeking it or not, is I'm seeking to understand myself, and
Right.
they can do it in really healthy ways or unhealthy ways, but there is this really awesome opportunity to not just see that about yourself, but also see that about others.
Right.
Classic 2 saying that. Classic
Yeah.
2. Who
Yeah.
wants to understand?
I mean, I do think that's one of the beautiful things about the Enneagram, though, is it gives you this window. And I remember early on in learning the Enneagram having this sort of compassion of as you learned the motivations for
Totally.
the other types and how those were, how those are created for people, right? And at some point we can talk more about the psychology of early childhood development and how personalities are formed. But
Yeah,
in this moment, it's just that recognition of like, oh man, we take these things on and we attach all these meanings to these things just in an effort to be loved and taken care of. And sometimes we do it in really flawed ways.
100%. 100%. I think it harkens back to a lot of my 2 things where I am anticipating others' needs and creating a story out of what those needs are when it could be completely inaccurate.
Right.
But I'm
Yeah.
curious for you. So, you were involved in this since 2017. My introduction to this was beyond that. I think it was 2022. What sparked you about it in comparison to other, a disc as an example
Oh,
that
sure.
stood out and you wanted to explore it differently?
Well, without going into, like, the whole sordid history, and I think this is a very 5 thing, but I was always looking for an answer. I would have considered myself a seeker, right? So I have taken all of them. If there is a personality assessment that can be taken, it is highly likely that I've taken it at some point. And I kept finding, like, little things where I'd be like, that makes sense to me, like in, Myers-Briggs, for example, or StrengthsFinder, like, "Oh,
Sure,
okay."
sure.
But there was never anything where I really felt I got some sort of true insight of something that could help me in my development. And when I came across the Enneagram the first time, I just took a free one online, which I don't recommend, and we'll get into that at some point, but
Yeah,
I just took a free assessment like a lot of people do, and that's their first exposure, and honestly,
yeah.
it didn't resonate, and so I had a similar feeling like, "Oh, this is just like everything else," because that
Mhm.
free test didn't go deep enough, it didn't, give the full window, and so when I found the IEQ 9, which I found through I had had enough interest sparked just from the free test and a friend who had mentioned it to me to do more research, as one does as an Enneagram 5, and I came across the IEQ 9 and took that, and then through that was like, "Oh, yes, this is it. This is exactly it." Uh,
Yeah.
but what stood out to me was this understanding of that motivation. I knew I had these behavior patterns,
Mhm.
but to your earlier point, it was like, "Well, I don't yeah, I do these things, but I don't have a full understanding of why I was doing those things."
Right.
And that Enneagram work sort of peeled back another layer deeper to be like, oh,
Mhm.
okay." So,
Mhm.
and that's where and then there's the real work, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. I think you bring up a great point because I think there is real work and real value behind it, and it can be as deep as you make it, which
Right.
is really unique, I think, to any other one that I've taken in terms of DISC or any of those, where you can get a certain level of depth from some of those others, but very few times have I ever reached out to somebody who knows their Enneagram type from a paid result, right? Where they're completely misaligned.
Right.
And they're oftentimes so in it that like they're doing the work without even realizing that they're doing deep work
Right.
and their daily interactions and the awareness that it brings. So it it really has brought me the ability to see myself for where things come from and what they are and appreciate or change what I can change. Also see the understanding in other people where oftentimes in my two-ness that would show up as like, in my unhealthy 8 of judgment of no, I must
Sure.
control, I must
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
and we'll get into all the types and everything, I know, but, um, it's been a really eye-opening journey for me, and I really encourage it for anybody who's interested in any sort of getting to know themselves on a deeper level or, you know, I can also relate this back to I had a lot of confusion about where that came from for me. Like, where those motivations came from, why I did what I did, and sure, I could relate it back to upbringing and things of that nature, but I couldn't really get a solid tie until I knew that's in fact my motivation
Right.
and started doing more deep work and where did that come from? to be more well-rounded, because that's the goal of the Enneagram, right? Is to be integrated into all 9 numbers, and that's the other thing that I thought was really great about it, where it doesn't put you in a box.
Right.
It gives you this really great awareness and opportunity of how you can become more well-rounded to each of those numbers. That was, like, a really strong hit of credibility for me with the Enneagram, is, like, you're not telling me to be a certain way.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so we want to just to kick this off as the first episode goes through kind of a primer of all 9 types, and because we're a 2 and a 5, might spend a little more time on those numbers just as we go through this and sort of what resonated for us with each of those as we discovered our types through the Enneagram. So ones often are called the perfectionist or sometimes the reformer. There's a couple of key things in the motivation for ones that it's intuitive, right? The perfectionist.
Mhm.
It's this desire to be perfect, to be seen as good, and they are really driven by that motivation, right? It needs to be perfect. I need to be perfect. The things I do need to be perfect. And this comes from that place where in order they take on this sort of messaging in their lives that in order to be loved, in order to have value, that comes through perfection. Is there anything you would add about sort of a primer on ones?
Yeah, maybe just add that they're their toughest critic. Like, that inner voice of criticism for themselves is so loud that it shows up in different ways, and that's why I, like, encourage people as they're listening to this, like, be careful not to type yourself just by a behavior, right? But they are their inner critic is the loudest for ones.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the key hallmarks. If you have heard about being tested, like learning your type in a narrative tradition of the Enneagram, one of the hallmarks that they talk about is that strong inner critic voice.
Mhm.
Um, and how strong that is compared to the other 8 types.
Yep, yep. 2s. 2s. So I am a 2, a social 2. Um, and we'll get into subtypes in a later episode, which is that social item that I was just speaking about. But 2 is often called the considerate helper. Um, and a 2, some hallmarks of a 2 are prioritizing others' needs or what they deem as others' needs ahead of their own. Oftentimes prioritizing, um, how do I say this in the most polite way possible? Because I am a critic as a wing. We'll get that to that in a later episode. But um, we oftentimes feel that we know what's best for others and act accordingly. I will say, as a mom, most moms would type themselves as 2s because of the strong need to focus on the tiny humans that we bring into the world and not prioritize our own needs. It is something that's really interesting because that's a requirement of parenthood. I would not type most moms that I have in my life as 2s, knowing them on a deeper level. But that act in and of itself of parenthood and putting your needs aside is where I resonate most as a 2. My wings are really loud for me, so I don't wanna speak too much on those just yet. Holly, what would you say from the 2s that you know in your life, like,
The
are the
2s I know.
loudest?
So I think you hit on a couple of big things, but that again, going back to that like deep thing where they feel that their value lies in
Right.
helping other people, right?
Yeah.
It's that they've attached all of their worth to this helpfulness. And if they're not helping, then it somehow diminishes their worth or somehow makes them
Right.
unworthy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think that's like a big core piece. I think you touched on it too, right? This anticipation of others' needs. A lot of times
Mhm.
twos with all the best intentions are trying to anticipate the needs of the people around them.
Mhm.
And where they get into trouble in that is sometimes they anticipate wrong. Sometimes they
Yep.
think they know something that they don't know,
Yep.
or they're trying to get ahead of something and
Right.
they don't ask the questions that need to be asked. And then the person on the receiving end is like, yeah, that's not, no, I didn't
Not
want
what I
that.
wanted. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
The growth work in that for me is the tactic of the story I'm telling myself
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
is
Sure.
that you need this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say those are the biggest traits of a 2 that I resonate with, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So jumping towards threes for a second, we'll just spend a second with them. They are often called the competitive achiever, sometimes called the performer. And just like ones and twos, right? They're getting their worth from achievement. And so they tend to be folks that believe that their career, their status, the things they achieve in their life, the things they have in their life is what gives them value.
Right. Right.
I do love
Yep.
a good 3 though. I mean,
Man, I love a
they can be a
3.
lot of fun. They can be a lot of fun. Yeah.
I love a 3, but I can also be really triggered by a 3. So,
Yeah.
that's in the work for me as a 2. I can be triggered by a 3 because I am trying to anticipate the need of a really strong individual
Right?
that
Who wants to
that
win, by the
knows what they
way.
want and they are gonna go get it. Like,
Yeah.
where I'm like, "No, no, 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 let me, allow me."
Yeah. I think on we didn't talk about this a ton in the beginning, but when you think about it, all of these numbers have what in the Enneagram circles they would consider a range of health. And that's really speaking to behaviors from unhealthy
Yep,
to healthy, right? Or you could think of it as kind of in the ego versus fully integrated and
yep,
letting go of the ego.
yep,
And I think for threes, sometimes the triggering thing is that when you find a three that's in more in their ego place, maybe not as self-aware, maybe hasn't done the work, that competitive thing can cause tension and
you got some
friction.
friction. For sure, for sure. And I think that, like, speaks to any range of healthy to unhealthy numbers, right? Like, when we're showing up on the unhealthy side of a number, that means we're taking out the worst traits of that number. And that's triggering in and of itself because those are negative behaviors that are have negative connotation, right? So that's a good call. It's a good call that we didn't talk about earlier. So going to our fours. Man, I love a 3, I love a 4.
For yeah.
I have some wonderful 4s in my life that are sometimes called the intense creative. What are some other names for a 4 that you've heard?
Sometimes the fours can be referred to as the individualist or the romantic,
Yes.
which sort of
Yes.
speaks a little bit more. Although I think a lot of fours resonate with intense creative as well. They kind of like
Yeah.
that
They're unique, they're special, right? Like,
special. Yeah.
um, which I think is one of the traits that the 4s that I know in my life carry out really on their sleeve is, like, I'm unique, I am different, like, they dress the way that they wanna dress, they
Yeah.
act the way that they wanna act, they kind of march to the beat of their own drum. Sometimes they can read, like, really artistic, but really angsty, like,
Yeah.
have this real, like, radical energy about them, and I think that's the again, the 2 in me that's like, "I wanna that looks
Yeah,
cool. I wanna do
yeah.
that.
Can I just try that on? Yeah.
I just wanna try it on just for a second."
Yeah. I think
Um,
for fours, Like, that's all of that individualism is driven from, again, this belief that I have to be special, I have to be different
Yeah.
in order to, like, get love. Like, no one
Right.
will love me if I'm ordinary, or no one will love me if I dress just like everyone else. I need to stand out and in some sort of way that makes me unique and special. I do
Yeah.
I there there are things in every number that I love, but in 4s, it is that sort of commitment to authenticity.
Totally.
Yeah,
I love that. And sometimes it's like it shows up unapologetically, right?
right. Yeah,
I think that's a good spot for a reminder too, like using the Enneagram as a crutch or an excuse for a behavior the way that you are isn't the intent, right? It's an awareness tool. And as we're going through each of the numbers, right, it's important to identify that, sure, you are the way that you are. That's not meant to be an excuse. It's meant to be explored.
right. How do we lean into the things that are uncomfortable and
Yep.
get better and grow? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, anybody who's, well, I'm a whatever my number is what it is.
Yeah. Here I am.
Yeah, not necessarily the point.
Yeah. Yep. Can we go to fives? I love a five, obviously.
Yeah, we can go to
I
5.
love a
So,
five.
yeah, as the resident 5 on this podcast, so 5s, depending on the what you read and about them, they can sometimes be called the investigator, the thinker, the observer. The IQ9 calls them the quiet specialist, which personally is not my favorite way to be described, although it is true. I do prefer investigator, observer personally, but it's really motivated by sort of the gathering of knowledge. And for me personally, that motivation is driven out of childhood for sure, but there was quite a lot of reinforcement in my household to, 1, be quiet, and 2, to know things. So I was rewarded a lot for what I knew, in an educational sort of way, the books I
Mhm.
read, things like that, the things I studied, the things I was interested in, that was highly rewarded, uh, coupled with the "You're a child, be seen and not heard."
So, said differently, like, is there safety in knowledge? Like, is there
Yes. Yep. Yeah,
and
so that's
I use safety and maybe comfort as a synonym, right?
similar.
Like,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, it's the and every number is solving for something, right? In terms of this thing that's motivating them.
Yeah,
They're solving for something. And for
yeah,
me, it was what kept me safe was the knowledge, the being quiet, the studious
mhm,
sort of mentality
yeah,
was definitely a safety thing. And we'll talk about this in future episodes as well, but sort of the avoidant thing, the withdrawing, the pull away, there was safety in that too. And so some 5s will talk about the world felt really intrusive. And so the world that they lived in their head felt safe by comparison. And I can relate to that a little bit. But the other thing that's hidden in this motivation to collect knowledge is this strong desire to know enough things that you can be independent and not require anything from anyone else. And I definitely resonate with that. It was, how do I know enough that I don't have to need something from someone else?
got it. That's super interesting. Um, I love a five. You know, I love a five. For me, and I want to spend some extra time on fives because they like the closest I feel to a 5, I think, is driven out of my 2 behavior in that I want to vet things out loud, and I wanna talk things through, and the 5s in my life are a really safe space to do that because, 1, they let me talk, Like, like, you guys listen, like, and listen to everything. Um, but 2, I've never felt safer than I have with a 5 when they in relation to the ability to challenge my thought and make me feel heard and not judged for what I'm saying. So, I've always felt really safe and really comfortable with a 5, and you're my, like, base knowledge for 5 is my
For sure,
closest
sure.
5 friend.
Yeah.
Um, but it is this level of security that I find in it, and I always question, like, is it because we had, like, similar feelings in our upbringing? Is it because but I really think that it is because you compliment me so well from the standpoint of me needing to talk at you sometimes just to, like, get it
Yes,
out. Just to
that's it.
get it
Yeah, we
out.
didn't. Yeah, we didn't talk about that when we talked about twos, but that is a thing. Twos
It's a
definitely
hallmark thing
uh,
that twos do.
process verbally. Yes.
Yes, process verbally. And I think that's another reason why I love a 5, but the thoughtfulness and the things that you think of that I don't, and the reframe that you have that I don't when I am, blinded by the good and all of the human
Oh,
beings that I, like,
sure. Sure.
wanna see as good, you know?
You
"Well, what
little
if they're a
cynical
really great
five.
person?" And Holly's like, "Are you sure?"
Yeah.
"But what if?"
Right.
Like, you're so right. You're so right. I think there's so much strength in that, and I bring it up because it's a little bit of it's really symbolic for me if I think of a 5 where the safety is in the quiet, but when it is vocalized, like, so profound
Sure.
because the information is digested and to a point where, like, it's fully baked, where you don't have to word vomit at other people to get there. So
I don't know if it feels that. I mean, I appreciate that compliment. I don't know if it feels that way all the time. Because that's the issue with the 5, right? Is there's no way it's ever fully baked. I could always know something else.
yeah,
I could always have learned additional insights and have
yeah,
something deeper, better, blah 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 to
yeah,
share. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Hey, listen, your quarter baked is my 100 baked. So that's ready. Let's go. All right. So a 6. My favorite name for a 6 is the loyal skeptic. And we'll get into this in later episodes. We keep saying that, but we will. So stay with us, right? Is
Yeah.
tri types. And
Yeah.
I am a thinks like a 6. So there is a acts like, feels like, and thinks like for each number. I am a thinks like a 6. And that loyal skeptic is somebody who is prepared for anything and everything, the worst case scenario, the best case scenario, and anything in between. So, the 6s I have in my life are always prepared for everything. They are loyal and sometimes to a fault. They read very what's the word that I'm looking for? They read very hard to read to me,
Oh, okay.
where you never really know what they're thinking. They seem to really attach themselves to wanting the greater good for everybody that's around them, wanting the greater good for everybody that's around them. What would you add about 6s?
I have some 6s in my life. One of my closest friends is a 6. And the loyalist thing really comes through, and
Mhm.
sixes, at some point we'll spend a whole episode just on sixes, but sixes are very interesting on the Enneagram because while they are one type, have they have sort of a counterpart 6, right? So you can have
Yeah.
phobic and counterphobic 6s, and it shows up a little bit differently, although they're motivated by that same idea of I have to be vigilant. I have to prepare myself for all the things. So they're
Yeah.
both motivated by that, just shows up a little differently.
Mhm.
So they're fascinating in that way. But I've found with them that they can be loyal to a fault. Sometimes it does get them in trouble. Sometimes they have
Mhm.
trouble setting true boundaries or
Yep.
ending things when they should be ended. So there's that piece of it. But they're also like so great to have around from the standpoint of the number of times that I show up someplace and I need something and I don't have it and they have it because they always have everything that you could
Yep.
possibly need. Do you need Tylenol? Do you need ibuprofen? Do you need a Band-Aid? Do you need a towel, pair of socks, change of
Yep.
clothes? Like they're always prepared for everything, including taking care of their friends who are like, well, crap, I left the house without all the things that I needed.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Love that 6
So,
energy.
yes,
Love that 6 energy. So, 7s.
sevens. Sevens, and I always joke about this, and Tana's heard me say this many times, but if I could choose a number on the Enneagram, I would choose to be a 7. And I think it's because of they have this like lightheartedness about them. They seem like they're always having fun. They're able to be
Mhm.
spontaneous,
Mhm.
go on adventures, all of
Mhm.
that. So I love the 7 energy. Just like every number though, like your greatest strength in excess can become a weakness. And so they're motivated by avoiding pain. And,
Mhm.
that avoidance tactic sometimes can come back to bite them when they don't want to do some hard things that maybe they need to do.
Mhm. For sure. So, the name that rings true for me for 7s is the enthusiastic visionary, or sometimes just the visionary is how they're called. Um, but I love that 7 energy. I would say that if there was any Enneagram that I could choose for my children to be, it would be a 7, and Holly knows this. My kids, well, my 6-year-old is trying on Enneagrams right now, I feel. The 7 is just, like, I think this really beautiful picture of somebody who is constantly looking for, "How is this good? Like, how can we make this better? Like, this is so exciting." And there's this, like,
Right.
really, really beautiful energy about a 7 that I love. And, with a 7, though, on the flip side, they're regularly reframing, right? So, reframing to the positive, and that can be really hard. That can sometimes read like toxic positivity, right?
Right.
Where are we really grounded in reality here?
Right.
And
Right.
what's realistic? But the 7 has the best of intention for a ton of positivity and how things could be better and things are great. And so I think everybody needs a 7 in their life just for that,
Yes.
like,
Yes.
uplift.
Right.
Uh, but a 7 really, the work for a 7 is to get grounded in reality and be okay with that reality sometimes being negative, and really taking up space in some confrontation and some
Right.
negativity where it doesn't
Right.
show up as passive aggressive, as non-confrontational or conflict avoidant. So that 7 energy is beautiful.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if there was a choice,
Yes.
because there isn't,
You're right. Because there isn't.
you grow through what you go through, my friends.
Right. Well, yeah.
You would add
Okay.
about 7?
I think we've for kind of a kickoff sort of thing. I think it's a good primer with sevens. I do just resonate with what you're saying though in terms of that energy is it can be so inspiring.
Mhm.
It can to me it feels aspirational and I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
one of the things I love about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Shifting gears, which is like a hard right turn
You're taking a hard right.
into the Enneagram 8.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So controller.
Yeah. You have some pretty legit personal close-up
I
experience with the
sure
Enneagram 8.
do. I sure do. My husband is in Enneagram 8, um, which is really interesting because 8 is my stress number. And he is a first responder. So it's interesting that he has that type and aligned with the career path that he did, right? So the active controller, their safety is in being able to truly have control over any and every situation. With an 8, there's a strong sense of what is right and what is wrong.
Yeah.
Um, Similar to a 2, they feel that they know what's best for others. Um, so sometimes it can read like they are telling you how to, like, here's how you should live your life. But
Right.
an 8 has this really awesome ability to motivate and bring people along with them. They also are strong advocates. Like, they are standing up for the injustice in the world
Right.
and, um, really, taking on this ownership that it is theirs to guard and protect the people who can't guard and protect themselves. Which is interesting with a first responder husband as an 8,
Yeah.
but I love an 8. I have other 8s in my life that are a different subtype than my husband, and they read completely differently, which I think is really beautiful about an 8, and man, they are strong and driven, and I can get behind an 8. I love an 8.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a lot of 8s in my life also. It's interesting, and we'll get into this in future how the lines connect the numbers, but you and I both connect to 8.
Mhm.
But I agree. I think there's a strength and there's this sort of driven justice sort of energy, right? Like
Yeah.
behind them. And they want it's important to them to give that outward
Yep.
view of that they are strong, that they are in control, that they have like they have control.
Mhm.
Things aren't spinning or chaos usually.
Right.
But I think one of the best analogies I ever heard as I was learning the Enneagram is that 8s are marshmallows wrapped in barbed wire. And so there's this big, strong, tough kind of exterior, but really there's kind of a little kid inside all of them, right?
Yeah.
Or the softness inside of them, which I think is
Yeah.
part of what drives that protective nature, right?
Yep.
You don't protect something if you don't care about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I've heard this about 8s where it's like, it's driven out of they wanted to be protected at one point. I've also heard it where they wanted to be allowed to have a feeling, and maybe that reads in parenthood for me like, you can't be emotional about that, or you can't,
Right. Yeah.
like, what you're being
Yes.
emotional about is not a big deal right now, like, kind
Right.
of dampening that. But
Yeah.
I love an 8.
Yes.
Many 8s
Yes.
in my life.
How many? Yeah. All right. So nines. I'm married to a 9. Nines are often called the adaptive peacemaker or just the peacemaker, sometimes the mediator. I Most of them are pretty comfortable with the peacemaker thing. And it makes so much sense because they also would like never rock the boat and be like, no, I'm not comfortable with that. But they are driven from this place, right? Of this calm, peaceful thing is what keeps people together, right? And so they see a lot of themselves as sort of the glue in different aspects, right? And when I was first learning about the Enneagram, I read this book called The Enneagram of Belonging. And they talk about how the 9 sits on top of the Enneagram symbol, right? And so they sort of have this view of all 9 numbers, and they
Mhm.
have this ability to sort of morph a little bit, and they can be a little bit like all 9 numbers in some way, but that true motivation for them is keeping the peace and keeping harmony with the people around them.
So, when your husband found out he was a 9, was the reaction
Yeah.
like, "Oh, 100% that tracks," like
Well, we went back and forth, and we'll get to talking about wings, but he went through he went through the typing process, I think similar to anyone, where he was like, "Well, yeah, that makes sense to me, but what about this?" And so
yeah.
sometimes we would drop into like, "Well, could it be 2 is it not 9 energy? Is it 2 energy?" And he would go
Mm,
back and forth on the, well, right, but was your motivation that to be helpful, or was your motivation in helping to keep the peace? And the motivation was to avoid the conflict and keep the peace within the household, not for the value of being helpful. So we kept
mhm.
having to come back to this idea of it's the motivation. Like, yes, you were helpful, but the reason you were helpful was because it kept conflict from happening. So,
I
yeah,
hope
we went
we
back and
get to
forth for a
this
while on that. Yeah.
yeah, I hope we get to this in another episode, but, like, I'm so interested with the triathlete mindset that both of you have, right? Like, this is a huge part of your life, like, being in triathlons and training and, like, the well-roundedness of that, where I would be super interested to hear what that energy sounds like internally for a 9 as a triathlete.
He can push pretty was in every once in a while, I'll joke with him that he's really an 8 masquerading as a 9. He's a 9. He truly is a 9. It's just a joke. But also, when we get to the lines and we talk in more depth about that, it's the for him, it's the pull to 3 that's the driving
Okay.
force.
Okay, that tracks. That tracks with lines. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting. Okay.
right.
Okay. So 9
Well,
types. We made
so
it
9
through.
types. We did any good time. We're not gonna be
Great
too
time.
long. Yeah.
Great time.
So yeah, I think that's the very quick overview. There's
Yep.
so much nuance. There's so much to go deeper on.
Yep.
But hopefully that gives a little bit of a window into each of the 9 types. And as we continue down this kind of adventure of looking at the Enneagram, we're going to go deeper into all of the things that are part of the Enneagram as a system.
I'm super excited, and I think I know what I'm most looking forward to is really diving into each of those numbers and getting to know what a healthy and unhealthy number looks like, sounds like, feels like for some of the people that are in our lives too, right?
Right.
Um, so I really hope people listen in and come along on the journey with us to understand this adventure of what it means to be each number, what it means to be well-rounded and well integrated into the Enneagram
Right.
and how that can really transform your life if you let it. And
Right.
you really lean into the ownership of that where it's uncomfy, you know? It is. It's prickly. Um,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
prickly, but you and I talk about this, like some of our favorite people to listen to on podcasts even are integrated into their Enneagram. Some of my favorites, Glennon Doyle and Abby
Yeah.
Wambach. And um, this is a really interesting topic to deep dive into that not a lot of people have digging real deep on, and I'm
Right.
excited for that. I'm excited for that.
It's a really yeah, it's a very interesting like way to work through self-development, and that you can take this one tool and have a lifetime worth of growth within one tool if you choose to take it that way.
Well, I'm excited for the discomfort. I'm excited for the laughs. I'm excited to um, here along the way, but I think, leaning into this awesome adventure for both of us, and this blossomed out of an awesome friendship that is built on all kinds of different things, and in reality, our lives couldn't be more different, right?
No, no.
I'm a mom. I'm a mom of 2 boys. I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. I think that a majority of my life is revolved around that, but at the same time, I identify as a professional. I identify as somebody who wants continuous self-improvement and to challenge the status quo for myself.
Right? Yeah.
Um, Walking on the wild side that way, it's my little form of rebellion with myself. Um,
Sure. Sure.
but I think, I mean, just before we go, can you shed a little bit of light into you personally and what you're excited about?
Sure. Well, I think this is really exciting. We touched on it a bit at the beginning, right? We've been talking about this for a while. The Enneagram as a tool, but then also this idea of like, how do we share
Yeah.
what it means to us, the value that it brought to us? How does that have a bigger impact? So I'm excited to go down that journey and find out. Me personally, yeah, to your point earlier, we could not be more different in multiple ways. And while we're not opposites exactly on the Enneagram, it's pretty close.
Close.
But I don't have children. I am a dog mom. I have 2 dogs and been married for a long time, 20 almost 21 years. So, yeah, so some of that's just like crazy different life choices, right? I made a choice early on to not have children of my own. So so yeah, I think that we'll dive deeper into some of our personal stories as we go too. What drove those choices? You could tie some
Yeah.
of that easily back to the Enneagram and wings and how we made choice, like how those choices came to be.
Mhm.
But my husband and I have always been super active, and so through our lives together, we've had many active hobbies. Currently, we're on that triathlon track, specifically in the long course for any triathletes out there in the long course version of triathlon. But yeah, like I think we're gonna have fun. I think this is gonna be fun to explore, all of it together and just see how much we can share and hopefully it brings change and growth to other people as well.
I love that. And on that note, I hope for
Yeah.
growth, I hope for curiosity, I hope for discomfort in a learning capacity.
Yeah.
I hope for brighter and more clear days on the other side of that, and I think the other thing that we haven't talked about that we're both doing that I think is a good tie is we are doing the hard work of understanding where this came from,
Right.
and working with Brandon at Evolved Athlete. You guys have both started a podcast together. Brandon's active in the corporate environment, but with athletes, and I think it's a really awesome thing that I give full credit to Holly for getting me involved in this relationship with Brandon, but it's deep work, it's hard. It is 100% every single day challenging where um you're thinking about the things that you discuss and you're thinking about the things that brought you to the place that you are today and the person that you are today. And continuously question that, I think is bold. I think it's amazing. I think it's beautiful. And to be able to do that through that work plus this tool has been life changing for me.
Yeah. That deep work I think goes hand in hand with the Enneagram. At least for me, I had the Enneagram first. I think the deep work with Brandon that he does, the Enneagram helped give me the words to talk
Yeah.
about the things that I needed to talk about in that. level of deep work.
Yeah, and for those who end up listening to this and finding us and following along, I hope they engage with us. I hope they ask questions. I hope there's comments of things that they learned or things that they didn't expect.
Right.
And I'm here for that. I'm here for those little surprises that I felt when going through the Enneagram and going through the work with Brandon simultaneously. But I hope for growth. I hope for curiosity. That's what I hope for.
Awesome. All right, cool. Well, there we go. First one down. We'll look for
Only,
recording a whole bunch more of these. We're good. We're good. All right.
this will be great.
It'll be great. We'll talk soon.
Okay.